The Nikon F100 is probably my favorite 35mm camera ever made. I mean, it combines decades of Nikon's experience with making film cameras with some of the best features that come with a digital DSLR. Like, this is just a really easy camera to use, and you can get really good results from it. So while you will pay out the nose for a Nikon F6, this really does all of the same things. There's no reason to pay more for that camera. So today, I want to show you how to use my favorite camera. I'm going into this assuming you have some familiarity with interchangeable lens cameras, like you've used mirrorless or DSLRs in the past. If you haven't, you'll probably want to get familiar with some of the basic principles of photography first before worrying about gear. Now, if you're new to 35mm photography, I got you covered. And also, this is an excellent choice if you are a beginner, because it operates the way a modern camera does for the most part. It's not like one of those exotic older cameras that you're really going to have to learn a new way of shooting in order to use. Those cameras are great, but this is a camera that when I want to seriously get some shooting done, this is the one I reach for. Now, to use any camera, you're going to need some lenses first. So let's talk about the lenses that the F100 uses. The good thing is that the F100 has decades worth of lenses that it can use. I mean, there are a few cameras out there that can use as many lenses well as the Nikon F100. Now, the Nikon F100 is an autofocusing camera, which means it's going to work best with AF lenses, AFD lenses, and AFS lenses. Now, you can use manual focus older lenses with the F100, but you're really better off using a camera like the F3 that's made for them. They have like a split prism in their mirror that makes it really easy to do quick, fast focus with manual focus lenses that you're relying on a dot on this, and it's just not as good. AF and AFD lenses are a little older. They have an aperture ring, and yeah, you can get a lot of really good glass for pretty cheap with these. Now, AFS lenses, they usually don't have an aperture ring on them, and you're going to be able to identify them by their saying AFS on it. Now, annoyingly, towards the end of the F-mount line, before Nikon transitioned over to the mirrorless Z lens series, they started making lenses called AFP lenses, and those lenses aren't compatible with any film camera. They have some sort of like focus motor in them that's not compatible. I don't know all the details, but make sure that the lens that you get says either AF, AFD, or AFS on it, and not AFP. And AFP lenses really are newer, and a lot of them were DX, which is like the small sensor size lenses. So you probably won't run into them, but just something to keep in mind. Now, the other question you may have while picking out lenses is if you need VR lenses or if you should avoid VR lenses. Well, technically the F100 is compatible with VR lenses, but despite what I've read on the internet, I'm not convinced that VR actually works on the camera. It doesn't hurt anything on the camera, but I don't think it's actually giving you any improved performance. I've tested this where on my digital cameras where I know VR is working, I can actually hear it and feel it when I switch it on and off. Whereas when I'm using it on any film camera like the F100, when I turn VR on and off, there's no change and I don't feel it working. So VR isn't something to be avoided. I use this lens all the time. It's a VR lens, but it's not going to add anything. So don't go out of your way to find a VR lens for your F100. Now, if you just got an F100 and you don't have any lenses and you don't know where to start, just grab a 50mm AFD 1.8. These things are super cheap. I bought this brand new and I've used it for so many years. I love this thing. Really, any film camera system, your 50mm f1.8 lens is always going to be one of the best things just to get your hands on. And yeah, they're always great. They're super cheap. So yeah, if you're looking for something to grab, this is the guy to get. All right, so you got your lens. Let's put it on the camera. So with most Nikon lenses, there's a white dot. And that white dot matches up with the white dot on the camera body itself. Some manual focus lenses and some AF lenses will have this like line on where the aperture is selected, but that's also the white dot essentially. So to put the lens on, just line it up. You're going to line up the white dots, push down, and you're going to turn the lens in. That's going to be counterclockwise until you hear it click, and now you have your lens on. That white dot is going to be in the center of the top of the lens once it's clicked into place. Let's take the lens off or switch lenses. Hold down this button that's right next to the lens body. Push it down. Now move the lens the opposite way. counterclockwise, and it's going to pop right out. All right, so you got your camera, you got your lens. Next thing you need is power. So one of the great things about the Nikon F100 is it's powered by 4 AA batteries. Those batteries are super easy to find and they last a super long time. To get into the battery compartment, you're just going to flip up this little guy here, twist it counterclockwise just a little bit until it pops open, and then you can just pull the whole battery cartridge out. So this little holder has room for 4 AA batteries. I always recommend using rechargeable lithium type AA batteries rather than alkalines. Alkalines, if you don't use them, will eventually leak. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. So if you leave it in here and you don't use the camera for a while, it might ruin your battery compartment. Now, if you get a used one of these cameras and the battery compartment does have damage, first thing to try is isopropyl alcohol. Sometimes that can kind of clean these things off and they'll work fine. If it doesn't work, you may have to get a replacement battery little thing. But luckily, those are things you can find online and you don't have to replace the whole camera. There's little guides on where to put the batteries in. Super easy to figure out. Once you have the batteries in the camera, you just put them right in the bottom here. Push this thing over, put it down, and now you have power. You'll know you have power because you'll be able to turn the camera on and the little LCD on the top will light up. These batteries last a super long time. I charge my batteries like every few months just to be sure that they're good to go. Or if I'm about to embark on a really big shoot, I charge them before then. But I've never been able to kill the batteries on one of these things. Supposedly they shoot like 36 rolls of film before they die. But when was the last time you shot 36 rolls of film? So you have your lens, you have your batteries. Next, you're going to need the film. There's a little window in the back that lets you look into the camera and see if there's already film loaded into it. And often the way it's lined up, you can actually see what kind of film there is, how many exposures, all that fun stuff. So yeah, check the window. If it's empty and it says E on the top LCD, that means there's no film in the camera and you can open up the back. Now, anybody who is of a certain age like me or older, they're going to know that when you have film in the camera, don't open the back. Like if your film gets exposed to light, it will destroy it. So if there's film in the camera or it's halfway through a roll, just make sure you don't open it up. I know that sounds super obvious, but if you haven't shot with film, you just don't know. So to insert film into the camera, there's a little latch on the side here. You press down on the top part here, press down, slide it down, and the back just pops open, revealing the inside of the camera. Now you're going to put in the film cartridge. You're going to basically put it in what I consider upside down, just so that it locks into the side. You're going to pull the leader, which is the little bit of film that's already outside the roll, until it gets to about that red dot on the back. And then once everything's kind of in there, close the back. It'll push down the film so it kind of aligns properly. Turn the camera on. You'll see this little switch in the front. Switch it over to on. And then just press down shutter to take the first photo. It'll advance and say 1 on the top, and that means that it successfully rolled out the film to the first picture. If it flashes E or something screwed up, you may need to open up the back of the camera and reseat it. But usually it always just figures it out and gets to 1. This camera's really good at grabbing film and pulling it through. All right, you got your film in there, but you're not quite done yet. You need to make sure that the camera knows what the ISO rating of the film is. Now, if you're familiar with digital photography, you know the ISO is the sensitivity of your image. So usually it means how much power is being cranked into the sensor. But on film, every roll of film has its own ISO rating. And also, you may actually be ignoring that rating and doing your own, like pushing or pulling it. Most modern film rolls have a little like code on the side. It's called a DX code. And the camera, like any newer camera, like the F100, can actually pick up that code and just automatically set it to the correct ISO, which is super helpful. So to make sure that it's doing that, just hold down the top ISO button. On the top of the camera, you can actually switch between the modes and you can see it go between the different ratings. I mean, there's a ton of them, and you're going to start really low, like at ISO 8. There's also an option for just ISO DX. That's what I leave it on. That means the camera is automatically detecting what the ISO is. So once you have it set where you want it, whether that's manually selecting an ISO or just leaving it on DX, let go of the ISO button. A lot of the ways that you interact with this camera are typically holding down a button and then using the dial on the back or the front of the camera to switch between options, using a little LCD on the top. It's pretty simple once you get the hang of it, but yeah, that's how this whole camera works. The F100 has something called the custom settings menu, and it's this little CSM button on the back, and this is really the only spot where this camera gets a little complicated for my liking. And it's not that the CSM is hard to use, it's just that unless you have a key to what all the codes are, you have no idea what you're doing. I actually carry a little laminated card that came with my first F100 in my bag with me just in case I ever have to refer to it. And believe it or not, this is how first digital cameras were as well. So this is just what this was at the era. I call it the programming a VCR school of user interface. It's a little beyond the scope of this video to go into what every single CSM mode is. It's really just setting these things up the way that you like them. I'll link a image of what the manual has for that below, but basically the first time that you set up the camera, whether you're getting it from someone else, you're buying one, or you just haven't used it in a while, it's always good to check the CSM settings to make sure that there's not some weird setting that's been set up that you don't know about. So basically, like anytime you get a new digital camera, you want to just go through and make sure it's set up the way you want, and it's the same with this. To do anything, you basically hold down the CSM button. You'll see a number on the left. That is the menu item, like menu 1, menu 2, menu 3. And then the next number, which is 0 here, is the value in regards to that. So you hold down CSM, and if you want to change the value, you use the front knob to change the value of the menu option for that first item. And if you want to change items, you use the back knob, and that changes there. It sounds more complicated than it is, and then once you get the hang of it, it's fine. Other things to set up with this camera, there's a little diopter right here. This helps get, the magnification of the viewfinder to where you can see it. I have glasses, so I just adjust this to get to where it's comfortable for me. And you just literally pull it up and turn it, and that's how you're able to adjust it. Super simple. You probably used it on digital cameras before. The other aspect that you can set up ahead of time before shooting is the drive mode. So often with digital cameras, you might be used to getting 20 pictures per second or something. And this camera is not that fast, but it can get fairly fast. So because 35mm is pretty expensive to shoot, I generally leave it at S, which is single. So you press down the shutter, it takes one picture. And if you hold down the shutter, it doesn't take any more. That just prevents any accidents. But you can change that to where if you hold down on the shutter, it just keeps taking pictures. To change the drive mode, you just hold down this little button here, and then you turn this knob here. You'll see multiple exposures as an option if you go to left. Then you have S, C, CS, which are just two continuous modes. And then you have a timer mode if you're one of the selfie shooters out there. Shooting this camera is very similar to shooting like a DSLR in that you're basically going to pick your mode and then make small adjustments from there. So for example, you can pick from program, aperture priority, shutter priority, and manual, just like any other camera out there. And then make adjustments to your aperture, your shutter speed, etc. from there. Now to switch between modes, you're going to pick naturally the mode button, hold it down, then use the back knob to switch between the different modes, the manual, program, shutter, and aperture priority. Depending on what you're on, you can then use the knob in the front and the back to adjust further. So right now I have this in aperture priority mode, and I can use the front to adjust aperture. If I switch over to shutter, I can use the back to adjust shutter speed. And then if I have manual mode, I can use the back and front to adjust accordingly. The other adjustment that you'll probably want to make, just like on any modern camera, is if you want to do any exposure adjustment. Luckily, that's also right next to the mode button. There's the plus minus button you'll see right here. Hold that down and then use the back to adjust. Now, the metering of this camera is pretty good. It's a pretty smart exposure system, but it gets fooled in the same places that all cameras get fooled. So let's say you're out on a snowy day, you'll know that you want to adjust accordingly. Or if you're in a really dark environment and you want it to still look dark in camera, you'll know to adjust accordingly. There are different exposure modes, and you actually set them using this, but I just leave it on the middle setting, which is the matrix setting, as opposed to any of the dot settings, because it works fine. It's super predictable, and yeah, there's no reason to mess with exposure too much beyond just compensating one way or the other. This camera has 5 focus points. It has one on the top, one on the bottom, one on the left, one on the right, and one dead in the center. You use this little knob in the back here to select which one you want to use. And then you use this little knob here to select whether or not you're going to use all of them at once or one at a time. I generally leave it at one at a time, and then I select using the back button here. In the viewfinder, the one that you pick will be highlighted in red briefly, and also this little screen on the back will show you which one you're currently selecting. It's not many focus points compared to like a modern DSLR or the infinite focus points of a mirrorless camera, but it's enough to get the job done. And really, a lot of film cameras only have one focus point if you're lucky. So this is actually something I really like about this camera. If for some reason you want to lock the camera in one focus point, this little switch here will actually lock you out of using the knob mechanically. You just literally won't be able to press the buttons. And you can switch it back where you see the dot instead of the L, and then you can select the thing. The reason I tell you that is not because it's actually very useful to lock the back, but sometimes the back will get locked and you'll wonder why isn't anything working, and it's just because it got switched. So to take a picture, once you have everything set the way you want it, point it at your subject, press down halfway to focus, press down all the way to shoot. It's going to instantaneously advance to the next frame, so you'll be ready to take your next photo right away. The Nikon F100 counts up, so the number of pictures on the little LCD is how many pictures you've taken so far. So you know if you have a roll that has 24 images, if it says 23, you probably have like 2 or 3 more images left at most before you need to rewind. It'll say end once you reach the end of the roll, and it won't let you take any more pictures. To rewind film to take it out, there's a red icon for rewind on 2 spots on the top. It's because the exposure compensation button and the bracket button, hold down both of them at the same time and just hold it down while it rewinds the entire roll. Once it's done, you can pop open the back and remove the roll, put in the next one, and then keep shooting. So yeah, that's the Nikon F100. The best way to learn it is to take it out and shoot with it. You'll get the hang of it in no time. It really is a very intuitive and easy to use camera. It's also tough. I've used it in all kinds of weather environments, and while I wouldn't recommend throwing it in water, I've used it in the middle of blizzards and snowstorms, and as long as you dry it out afterwards, it does pretty well. So while I'm not going to say get it wet, this is a tough little camera right here. Also, just a note, the camera saves battery pretty easily on its own. You can kind of just leave it on all the time and not worry about it. I usually turn it on and off pretty much as I need it because it's pretty fast to turn on. In power saving mode, it just kind of goes blank on the LCD, but if you just tap the shutter, it'll reappear on the top here so that you can see where your aperture and all that is. So that's the Nikon F100. I made this video because I really want to share the love for this camera. Part of me kind of wanted to keep it to myself because I love this camera so much and I don't want it to start going up in price, and it's not like they're making more of them these days, but I really want people who have the F100 to appreciate them and shoot with them, because all things with film are fleeting and we should just appreciate and enjoy the gear that we got while we got it. So as much as I want to just build my own horde of Nikon F100s that I can use forever, I hope this video will help you use your Nikon F100, or if you haven't gotten one yet, maybe you want to get your hands on one and shoot one of these bad boys, because it's just a great camera and it's super fun to use. So good luck and happy shooting.